mom of little kids, so I know how crazy life can be, and I am full aware of all the fears, because let me tell you, when I joined Switch, all the fears, I just couldn't believe that people do these things to children. So, facing your fear though, identifying it, was super empowering to me when I joined Switch, because it's very deep, I cried a lot, but I also knew what to protect my kids from. And so I wasn't as scared as I was when I first did my volunteer training, because now I knew the evil, I could see it, and I knew how to protect my kids and empower them and their friends to hopefully prevent this from happening to more kids. So, oops. Okay, so we're gonna talk about kind of, so Switch's focus is human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking, and that's what we're gonna talk about. And I like to preface this by saying, we're going to talk about some really deep emotional things, and there might be some triggering things for some of you guys as well. If you need to take a step outside, please, don't stay here if you feel like this is just too much for you, because it's a lot, and I understand it, and there will be no judgment, because it's a lot. Okay, so this is a big one for me. I follow all the mom groups, all of them on Facebook, and the fear of the trafficker stalking you at Walmart or Target, it's not true. They're just propaganda. There are people that are weird and crazy, and there are stalkers, and there are people that do take kids, but there are less, of all of the trafficking cases, less than 3% actually are abductions. Most of this is happening in plain sight, and these children still live at home with their parents, and their parents don't even know, or the parents are the traffickers. And so we'll get more into that. So when you see the crazy person at Walmart or Target, it's not a trafficker. If you see people sharing things on Facebook saying, so-and-so said this, and there was a trafficker stalking them at Walmart or Target, please just be honest with them and say this is not a trafficker. I have a friend, Alia Paramore, who is with the Greenville Police Department, and she was like, this is another false claim, they're not real. I also, I didn't put this in my description because I just joined, but I'm also a member of the Upstate Human Trafficking Task Force, and I work on the prevention subcommittee. And so I'm all about spreading prevention and awareness so that we can identify what trafficking really is, so we can fight the true enemy. Having those people that are weird stalking you, people do kidnap, that's true, but they're not traffickers. It's a lot more riskier for them. So this is what you should be afraid of. A child in their room on their cell phone, or their computer, or their gaming console. This is where traffickers find your children. This is where they build relationships with them, false relationships, false friendships, and use that to exploit them and then turn them into trafficking victims. Very, very few victims are in captivity. Have you ever seen the movie Taken? I love me a good action film. I love me a good action film where the good guys win. That's my thing. That's what I'll watch all day long. And when I joined Switch, that's what I thought trafficking was like. Well, I'm safe. I live in America. I don't go overseas. I don't travel. And I'll never let my kids do it alone, so problem solved. But one, we don't have dads like Liam Neeson, unfortunately. Two, it's not what it looks like. That is very rare. And unfortunately, the US is actually the #1 trafficking destination in the world. So the threat isn't across seas. The threat is right here. We don't kidnap people and take them to other countries because people come to this country, including Americans, to buy sex trafficking, sex from boys and girls, and that's the other thing we're going to cover as well. Most of your victims are going to look like this. They're going to go to school, they're going to look normal, they may or may not look happy, but they're just an average person. Okay, so we're going to get dark and personal today. So Rebecca Bender is an amazingly strong woman. She was a victim of sex trafficking for 6 years. And her story, I love to share it because it is not what you would expect. A lot of times when we get through these vulnerabilities and who's at risk, which everybody, but who's more at risk, Rebecca Bender's story kind of breaks all of the stereotypes. She was from a family where her mom and dad were still together, so they were still a couple. She had a scholarship for college, and she was doing really well with her life, and then she got pregnant. And while all her friends went to college, she decided to stay home close to her family and take care of her baby. And so she did a community college, but she still hung out with some of her friends, and she met a guy at a party who seemed very interested in her, seemed like he loved her child, and so they started dating. And this progression took months to develop, where he further isolated her from her family, eventually talked her into moving to Las Vegas. She wanted to travel. She was from Utah, so she didn't want to stay at home. And so they went to Las Vegas, and this was after dating him for like 6 or 8 months. And that was when, as soon as they got there, he said, let's go celebrate. He had the baby go stay with his brother, he said, but it really wasn't his brother. And he took her to a warehouse and said, you need to go make money for me because we just moved you here and now I don't have any money. And so that's how her life of trafficking started. She was isolated from her family. She didn't have her baby. And so when you talk about like the love of a parent, I would do anything for my children, absolutely anything. And a lot of people say, well, why would people do this or why do they get started? It's not a choice. So identifying the enemy. So there's 2 types of trafficking, labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Labor trafficking is very much what most people kind of stereotype it as. People coming into this country to work for someone and doesn't get paid well, has horrible living conditions, maybe it's unfair work job descriptions, and so that's kind of labor trafficking. Sex trafficking is much more vast, much more blurry, and it's a lot harder to charge. Or to convict, I should say. So sex trafficking defined. Sex trafficking occurs when someone uses force, fraud, or coercion to cause a commercial sex act with an adult or causes a minor to commit a sex act. A minor does not need to have force, fraud, or coercion involved. If they are under the age of 18, they cannot legally consent to sex, and it is immediately sex trafficking. So force can be physical force or violence, but it can also be the threat of violence. So, a lot of traffickers, they don't have to hurt these people to make them scared of them, right? Like, people are very good at emitting fear and a force or a threat of fear. So they may have hurt somebody, and they make sure everybody in their group sees it, so that they don't have to hurt everybody. They don't have to physically force everybody. They just have to have the threat of force. And the victims know that it's real. I'm gonna like square dance with y'all. Okay, so fraud. This one is another one we see a lot, especially with social media or malls. Traffickers do kind of loiter at malls, and they have the beautiful, teenage girl that comes down, and they're like, oh my gosh, you were just so gorgeous. I just started a photography business, and I would love to get your photo for my portfolio. You'd really help me out. And so, what teenage girl doesn't be like, oh, you think I'm pretty? Because I would. And so they go there with the idea of becoming a model and quickly find out that it's not at all what they thought. And so they are a young, vulnerable youth that's now put in a compromising situation, and that can be the fraud that enters them into the life of sex trafficking. Coercion, this one gets a little crazy, but it's basically emotional manipulation. And we see this a lot with online predators. And so the stalkers, we were talking kind of about using Facebook to branch out and network and find cool things, but predators use it to find vulnerable youth and exploit them. And so coercion is that emotional manipulation, threats against family, or blackmail. And so with these teenagers who are, their prefrontal cortex is not developed, they make irrational choices and do a lot of at-risk behaviors that can put them in compromising situations. And it just takes one person, and we'll get to this too, but like traffickers are not big, scary, ugly men. They are sometimes good looking, sometimes they are female, sometimes they go to school with your children, and sometimes they can even be a cheerleader. And when I do my prevention curriculum at the schools, we have a list of photographs we hand out, and we say, if you think this person was convicted of a sex crime, a sex trafficking crime, please stand over here. If you think they're innocent, stand over here. And in this stack of photos, there is a cheerleader, a reverend, somebody that works with the fire department, military personnel, all kinds of people are in here. And all of these people, it's a trick, all of them are traffickers. And so there was a teenage girl that was exploiting youth in her school for trafficking. But that blackmail, it takes that person to go to a party, make a bad choice, maybe indulge with some alcohol, and get a picture or a video taken of them in a compromising situation. And then the trafficker will say, well, if you don't do this, I'm going to show your family, I'm going to show your church, I'm going to spread this through your school. And that is how a lot of youth get compromised into trafficking. Or it could be as subtle as teenage boys. They are more likely to be playing on their gaming consoles where they have the messaging apps in there, and You know, they're just complaining like, my mom said I have to get off again. I hate her, she's so mean. She always makes me, stop playing when this is all I want to do. She makes me eat dinner, woe is me. And then there's a person on there, it's like, oh my gosh, my parents were the same way. They just don't get us. And so they identify with them, they find commonalities, and then they'll start to be like, well, my dad doesn't understand, I was being bullied at school, and so he said I just need to man up. He says I'm not man enough. And so the trafficker, who the child does not know is a trafficker, will say, well, send me a picture of yourself without your shirt on. Let me see what you look like. And it seems innocent enough, but they send this picture, and then somebody described trafficking as a gradual expanse of boundaries. And so that just opens the door for them to send another picture, and maybe a more compromising picture. And so then the trafficker will say, well, I need you to do this for me. I need you to do this sexual act for me, for myself or for someone else. And if you don't, this compromising picture that you shared with me, I'm going to share with everybody that you don't want to know. And so that's how a lot of youth get kind of tricked into trafficking. And we already talked about under 18 does not have to have force, fraud, or coercion. So the types of trafficking, and these are always evolving and changing. So peer, that was the cheerleader trafficking other children in the school. Familial, this is the one that is most heartbreaking to me, and unfortunately the most common one here in South Carolina. Familial trafficking is a parent, cousin, grandparent, aunt, uncle, or sibling who is trafficking a family member in their home. Or it doesn't have to be in their home, they just have a family connection to them. Pimp trafficker, that's the most common one that you hear a lot. I like to break that one down. It's not like the old school when you think of like a pimp and a prostitute. It is what's called a Romeo pimp. And so these pimps pretend to be a boyfriend, a loving boyfriend, when this young girl is already confused about herself, let alone trying to charter these, the scary relationship path. And so they think this person loves them, and they'll do anything because this person loves them. And in reality, they are a trafficker. Gang trafficking. So if you think about gangs right now, their primary illegal activities are selling drugs or arms, right? Guns and drugs. And when you have a gun or you have drugs, I'm not hip to drug lingo, so always bear with me here. The kids like to laugh at me, but if I had like a handful of cocaine right here, how many times could I sell it before it's gone? One, maybe if I had enough for multiple people, a few times, maybe 10. But if you have a person, they can be sold up to 20 to 40 times a day. And so gangs are realizing that it's much more lucrative to be in the sex trafficking business because you get a lot more money. Survival trafficking. This is a sad one for vulnerable youth that are experiencing homelessness, where they perform sexual acts to get food, clothing, shelter, and it's not always an exchange of money. And I think that's really important for people to know. It's not just about money. So how it happens, recruitment. So we already talked about Rebecca Bender's story, but more commonly what we see here with the people that we work with Switch and what I see in the schools when I talk to youth is social network. And the social network is not social media. I'm talking about your neighborhood. I'm talking about your backyard. I'm talking about your kids' school, the mall, the places your kids frequent, Starbucks, Chick-fil-A, anywhere that they're anywhere they are. It's kind of scary, but it's not when you know how to identify and empower your children. But social network, predators are out there, and they are always looking for ways to find new youth. Home neighborhood, clubs or bars, internet, and that includes social media and gaming, and then their school. So they lure them in with promises of protection, love, shelter. If they have maybe a rough home situation where maybe there's a single parent, they don't have a lot of money, the kid doesn't have a lot of what they think are important, cool things like nice clothing or name brand purses, and so they give them that shelter. Adventure, that was me as a child. I couldn't wait to get out of Monroeville, Indiana, the small town that nobody, even in the big city, knew existed, and like travel the world. And so they'll find somebody that promises them, hey, you want to travel? I love traveling. I've been to Paris, I've been to Germany, like I could take you with me. And then work opportunities, and that goes back to that fraud. So how it happens, grooming. Trust is established. I mentioned that these traffickers will have relationships with these youth and young adults for months before they even start to show their true colors. And to me, that was astounding. Somebody that would spend that much time trying to build a relationship with my child, like you would just, I don't know, I always thought bad guys are just gonna get straight to the point and be bad, right? But they spend months trying to build this trust. They get a sense of safety. They meet their needs. So we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you need like food and shelter and stuff, but at the top of those is love and worth, self-worth, and things that the trafficker can easily supply because they have a lot of money and they want to have false promises. They meet their needs, and then boundaries are stretched. I talked about that gradual expanse of boundaries. So then they go into the breaking phase. This is when they begin to isolate them from healthy relationships. That could be their normal clan of friends that they're always hanging out with. It could be their family. We had one survivor say that anytime she was gonna go to her family's house, her Romeo pimp, her boyfriend, would start a fight with her. And so she would show up crying, angry, emotionally distraught, until she just stopped showing up. And she just thought it wasn't worth going to see my family anymore, because every time, like, they would just be so concerned about me, and they weren't even like letting me enjoy my time with them, and it was just like, what's going on? Why are you sad? And it was just every time. So she stopped seeing her family. They play psychological games to confuse victims and begin to mentally wear them down. What that looks like is, let's say, it was basically, well, you made me do that. You're so beautiful, and I get jealous because you're so beautiful, and it's your fault that you're so beautiful, and that's why I did that. And so it's very confusing to them, like, oh, well, maybe I need to do something differently with myself, and so they just start to play these mind games. Keep them awake to intentionally create physical exhaustion. That, again, is a known way that traffickers can break down victims. Let me get a water. Drink water. Starts to become more violent, instilling fear, and then may force sex. And so when they say, well, you're so beautiful, I get jealous, I had to rape you because I just couldn't help myself. And so they just start to gradually expose who they really are until they do the turnout phase. So this is when someone has commercial sex for the first time, and it's at the point where Stockholm Syndrome starts to develop. And those trauma bonds are very deep and very confusing, and they're hard to break, so hard. And I talked about how labor trafficking is pretty straightforward. I shouldn't say it that way, it's not, but it's a lot clearer to convict. Sex trafficking isn't, because these people really feel like this is their boyfriend. They really feel like their boyfriend loves them, and they just asked him to sleep with this one guy one time so they could pay their rent, and then it just happened one time, and they had enough money to pay their rent, so she had to do it again, and again, and again, but her boyfriend really loves her, and he's not a trafficker, and he would never do anything to hurt her. And it's very, very confusing for them to separate these things. There may be violence mixed in with affection. Branding can occur at this point. Branding is tattoos where they have some of their gang symbols or their trafficker pimp symbols, which can be a crown, it can be a star, it could be the name of the trafficker, and they're getting smarter to put them in concealing places. So it actually might be on the inside of their bottom lip, or maybe on their breast tissue, or more concealing places. And then sometimes a new name is given, and this one a lot of people ask, well, why would they give them a new name? Well, Crystal wouldn't go strip at a strip club, because that's just not what Crystal does, but Candy might. And so I can disassociate with myself and say, well, I would never do that, but when I'm doing that, I'm Candy. And so it gives these people a barrier so they can still somewhat protect themselves. So the cycle of trafficking and exploitation. So stage one, young people are at risk. Adverse childhood experiences, poverty, neglect, foster care, abuse, all of these contribute to the vulnerabilities that traffickers and exploiters will use. They prey on these vulnerabilities. And so when I go into schools, this is my favorite thing. It's very sad, and I cry a lot with these kids, but I really get them to open up to me and identify that as a teenager, we feel like invincible, right? Nobody can touch us, nobody can stop us. We're just living our best life. And I want them to know that I want you to live your best life, but I want you to understand that the world is a scary place and there are risks. And if you're gonna take these risks, because we know you will, we know kids are going to do things that us parents pray they never do, but I want them to take calculated risks. And since I'm not a teacher and I'm not their parent, I can talk with them very personally and say, if you are going to go to a party and you are going to indulge, can you have a safety net? Like, you go with these 3 friends and you leave with these 3 friends, and these 3 friends make a pact with you that you're gonna watch out for each other, and if they ever see you talking to a weirdo or somebody you're not familiar with, you guys are gonna have a code word or a text or a call to each other to be like, oh, I have to go, it's an emergency. And so I talk about how to prepare them for life and these risks that they might encounter. Exploited and trafficked through strip clubs, pornography, escort services, online websites, word of mouth. Victims who survive may repeat what they know, and that's another hard one when we talk about familial trafficking. I myself was like, why, how, I could never, I would rather die than let my child go through that. I would rather die than be the one to put my child through that. And so it was really hard for me to wrap my head around this one. But when you grow up in this life, and it's the only life you ever know, it gets really cloudy, right? And so you think, well, I did it and I survived, so my children can do it and they'll survive because it's the only thing that we ever do. And so they just don't know how to break that cycle. And then it obviously puts the next generation at risk and the cycle continues. So which of these people do you think were charged with human trafficking? Go ahead, shout out. Let's have them.
All of them.
None.
The guy in the orange shirt.
Top right.
All of these people were charged with human trafficking here in the upstate. I have done prevention curriculums, one of which was at Spartanburg High School, and they were like, oh my gosh, that guy was in my house. And I'm like, oh my goodness. But yeah, all of these people, like, and I love the diversity on here because, again, it's not a scary man. They are normal looking people, they are young, they are female. They just look like average Joes. Like, they don't look like somebody would be like, that's a trafficker, that's a trafficker. They're people. So common types, we have Romeo, Gorilla, and CEO pimps. And we talked a little bit about how gangs are seeing that sex trafficking is way more lucrative than guns or drugs. And so the CEO pimps literally see it as just that. It is a business to them, and they are in here to make money, and so they see these people as commodities, and these commodities have a lifespan. The average lifespan of somebody in the life is 7 years. So when we talked about Rebecca Bender being there 6 years, most people don't even make it that long. The average lifespan is 7. And so Romeo pimp is the boyfriend pimp. Gorilla pimp is if a girl does try to escape or does try to get away. Rebecca Bender, in her book that was just released, she talks a lot about gorilla pimps. These are the pimps that her boyfriend will send her to, and then he basically beats the crap out of her and assaults her over and over again so that she sees how good she had it before. And this is kind of the if you think of it as a business, this is kind of the work model. So at the top, you're gonna have your pimp. Right below him is what's known as the bottom girl. And so kind of similar to familial trafficking, the bottom girl was probably an older trafficking victim that's been doing this for so long, she now normalizes it, and now she's the manager. And so when I talk about how hard it is to convict these, the bottom girls are all dating the pimp. It's very confusing. The bottom girl, actually, I'm sorry, the girls, all of the girls here at the bottom of the triangle, not the bottom girl, they're all dating the trafficker. The bottom girl is the one that's going to delegate abuse. She's going to be the one that physically assaults them. If the girls get injured on their job or by their pimp or by the bottom girl, she's going to be the one that takes them to the hospital because it's a lot less suspicious to show up with another girl than it is a guy. And so she's basically the second in charge. And this is why it's so hard to end trafficking, because when the bottom girl goes to jail, the pimp is still free. And he just has another girl that he promotes to bottom girl, and he just keeps doing his thing. So understanding the enemy. So Switch, our focus is here specifically in the upstate, but trafficking on a global scale, it's the fastest growing crime in the world. The US is the #1 country for sex trafficking. And it's a $150 billion industry with $99 billion being solely sex trafficking. So that other $50 billion is just labor trafficking. It's estimated that 40 million people are victims of sex trafficking right now. And 300,000 of our youth here in the US are suspected to be involved with sex trafficking. 300,000. And it's sad we don't have very solid numbers on this because it's very hard to track. But we didn't even know about sex trafficking until about 2005, and by 2012 is when Switch was established here in the upstate, and when we actually got our human trafficking task force started in 2012. So only 7 years have we really been fighting it here locally and understanding it and not seeing these victims as prostitutes, but as victims. Because who grows up and says, I want to be a prostitute? And we like to focus, when we do the Human Trafficking Task Force, we like to focus on what is choice. Just because Rebecca Bender said, I chose to have sex with that man because I could go home to my daughter. Is that really choice? No, and so it's not that they are choosing this life. It is not that they are choosing to be a prostitute, but they are forced into it because they have no other options. So in 2019, the Attorney General's office reported a 360% increase in reported cases. Now, don't let that number scare you. To me, that's very reassuring. It's not that we are seeing more trafficking here in the upstate. It's that because of awareness, because of people identifying it more, we are reporting it more. And when we report it more, we can better understand the enemy and we can better prevent this from happening to more youth. Greenville County is the second largest county in South Carolina for human trafficking. There are 9 strip clubs in the upstate, 6 in Greenville alone, and these are known places that have sex trafficking. 13 escort services in the upstate, at least 5 Greenville-specific online websites to buy women. And on one website alone, there were over 3,700 women listed within a 50-mile radius of Greenville seeking sugar daddies. And this was actually done by Zaina, who is the executive of Switch. She got on one of these websites and immediately 3,700 women were listed seeking sugar daddies. And so sugar daddies is a new type of term that's been out there in the trafficking life. I guess it's not new, but it's coming up more popular again. And a sugar daddy is basically an older man who has a lot of money, who wants a college-age girl so he can help pay off her debt in return for sexual favors. And so 3,700. Southeast cases, so in the red are these hot spots. This is by the Polaris Project. It's a really awesome website to check out, and they have a lot of stuff for parents as well. But this map reflects where potential sex trafficking was known. And so you can see here on the eastern coast, it's pretty busy. And I also like to say too, like, yes, Highway 85 runs from Atlanta to Charlotte, which are both known trafficking hubs. They're both in the top 10 actually in the United States for trafficking, sex trafficking specifically. And a lot of people think it's the I-85 corridor. Well, Greenville County is the second largest in the state. Actually, over by Myrtle Beach in the eastern, by the coast, is actually the number 1 spot for sex trafficking. So it's not the I-85 corridor, it's the population, right? Myrtle Beach is a known Myrtle Beach is a known destination for traveling, right? Greenville's getting there, and the busier we get, the more we grow, the more need, in quotes here, the more need there's gonna be for sex victims. So our culture, it's highly sexualized and violent. This is something I talk a lot with my kids about. We watch movies that, or shows that like has something that was more provocative than I would like for my kids to have seen. And instead of ignoring it or being like, oh, I hope they didn't notice that, or just didn't pretend it. And depending on your child's age, like my youngest just turned 4 today, ooh, birthday. I'm not gonna have these conversations with her. We just try to have a conversation at the table because we have somebody building a house right behind our house. And my son was like, hey! And he's going over there to say hi, and I'm like, dude, we have talked about this. Like, you know, I know Mama's focus isn't stranger danger because that's not the big threat anymore, but like we don't go up and talk to strangers. And so we had this conversation about what's social etiquette. If somebody says hi, you may politely say hi back, but if they try to approach you or engage in more conversation, you just say, excuse me, I'd like to go get my mom and dad, and you come home, that's it. But you don't go up and say, hey, because I was just trying to be friendly. My 3-year-old, through this whole dinner conversation, I just wanted to beat my head on the table, like she was just not getting it. So what do you do if somebody says hi to you? I tell them my first name's Elsa, which is not true, and my second name is Trinity Rain. I'm like, oh boy, we're not getting anywhere. So, given the age of your children, take these moments as learning opportunities instead of being afraid of what your child's gonna see, because I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, the TV shows I watched did not involve this much sex, or this much provocative, or this much cleavage, or this much butt. And my kids see this because it's on TV. And so I want to talk to them about why that's inappropriate. And it's really funny, my son, he's 6 now, but when he was 5, we were watching a show on Netflix about a girl who got bucked off she got into a car accident and couldn't walk anymore, but she still wanted to do rodeo. Walk, Ride, Rodeo, I think is the name. It's a really great movie. You cry a lot, but it's great. And so she was doing a Skype call with her friend, who was a boy. He didn't have a shirt on for him. He's like, oh, everybody close your eyes. He's unappropriate. They kind of get it. So our culture is just highly sexualized. It's normalizing sexual conduct. Pimp and prostitute lifestyle is glamorized. It's in a lot of songs and music. There's so many songs that I used to sing and enjoy until I started working with Switch, and I would like listen to the lyrics and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like a known trafficking term. Like that's not like a normal term that people say. Like, is this song actually about trafficking? And it is. Pornography is becoming more and more accepted, and I think there's a slide right here. So 1 out of 2 adults say that viewing porn is wrong. 1 out of 3 teens and young adults say it's wrong. So the majority of teens are becoming more and more acceptable of porn. And this was actually taken in 2015. So you can imagine how much that's changed in the last 5 years. So we think porn is a victimless crime. Before I started working with Switch, I also thought the same thing. I thought these people chose this lifestyle and that was just their chosen career. I'm sorry, I tried to move the mouse cursor and then I opened up a whole bunch of things. Okay, so 49% of people in porn had porn made of them while they were being trafficked. Half. People within the porn industry become trafficking victims. So if they start in porn, it's very easy for them to become trafficking victims post-porn. It's used as training materials for youth. This one churns my stomach and makes me cry the most. But when we talk about familial trafficking, they don't wait till middle school or high school age to start trafficking these children. They start them very young. And so porn is their way to teach them what to do. And it's a gateway drug to buying commercial sex acts. Porn changes the brain. It alters the chemicals in your brain so that you can no longer get pleasure from just watching it, but you have to physically reenact these things. And the average buyer, this one was also very sad for me, the average buyer is a 30 to 70-year-old middle-aged white guy with a family, middle class. So he has family, his wife at home, but he doesn't want to do these sex acts with her because they're wrong, so he needs to go buy it from somebody else. So supply and demand. I talked about how the more busy Greenville gets as a tourist destination, the more demand that's going to come, and then that's going to increase the need for supply. So who are the buyers? So I just talked about this, 30s and 50s, sorry, I was a little off on my numbers. But the percent of women and men becoming addicted to porn is growing fast. 99% of sex buyers are male, and the majority of those buyers are white, educated men in their 30s and 50s with wife and children at home. There was a sting a few years ago done, I think it was done in Greer, but it involved local jurisdictions from Spartanburg, Anderson, Greenville County, it's Polk County, I think. And so they were police officers who pretend to be youth, and so they set up pretend profiles selling sex. And so these people meet thinking they're going to have sex with youth, and they actually walk into a house where there's a whole bunch of police inside and they get arrested. And so fighting the enemy. So this is what Switch's goal is. We have 5 programs. Awareness, which is exactly what I'm doing to you. The more we know about the enemy, the more we can identify what is really happening out there, and the more we can help end this. Prevention, my passion, going to the schools and equipping these children how to protect themselves and their friends and how to join together instead of being bullies to each other and judging each other. Demand, Switch is starting a new program that focuses solely on the demand of porn. And this is going to be this is going to be a group of men that go out and reach out to other men. There is a program right now when a buyer has been arrested. It used to be called the John School. They changed the name, I don't know the name. But they can, just like a speeding ticket, which I'm not guilty of, yes, I am. But you can pay a fine and then go to this class, and so it doesn't get put on your record. And in this class, I was upset at first. I'm like, what? They get out of it? But in this class, they actually get to hear from a sex trafficking survivor that says, you may thought that person you were sleeping with willingly chose this job. You may think that this is what they wanted to do, but I just want you to know on the other side of that room, there was somebody threatening our life. There was somebody supplying us with drugs to keep us addicted. There was somebody out there, and this was not what I chose. And so, Agent Michaels, who works with the FBI and Homeland Security, said he's never seen so many grown men cry at one time. And so Demand fights this face to face because a lot of people that view porn don't see it as that there are victims. They see it as a victimless crime. And so when they see that these are victims, these are not people that are willing participants, it changes the whole perception. Goodness. Intervention. So this is where we go out to places that we know where trafficking is commonly done, and we just meet these people where they are. We supply them with toiletries, hairbrushes, shampoo, razors, shaving cream, things that their trafficker's not going to supply to them because they aren't necessary to survive. But we just want to be friends with no strings attached. We want to show them what that agape love looks like from our Father by being that for them, so that we can say, if you ever need someone to talk to, if you ever want to get out of this life, because a lot of them don't know that they're being coerced into this lifestyle. So when we try to go out and rescue them and save them and pull them out of there, they're going to fight us because they don't think of it in that way. And so we just start those friendships so that they can have a safety line. So when they're ready, they can get out. And then restoration. So this is Switch's big thing, where people that are coming out of the life, we talk mostly about women because we have more female participants in our program than male. It's estimated that 45% of victims are male, almost half. And yet we only talk about female victims, or we only see female victims because there is so much stigma against men coming forward. The whole Me Too movement, the only thing I have against it was that it was so feminized. Men get sexually assaulted too, as children, as adults, and so they don't come forward as much. But our restoration program, we've had 3 men in the last 7 years that we've done this. Mostly it's female, and what we do is we take them from getting out of the life. We talked about the times that they get into this life or when they're young and they're vulnerable and their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed. So when trauma happens to you, at the age the trauma happens, your prefrontal cortex stops developing because your body is going into flight or fight mode, and so your lizard brain, right, your primal brain stem kicks in, and that's what keeps you alive. And so they have a lot of trauma where they can't rationalize normally. They had all choice taken from them, and so when they try to get out of the life, the recidivism rate is really, really high nationwide because it's all they know. It's the only job they've ever had. If you've ever switched a job, it's scary. It's scary having to learn that. But if you've had a job prior to that, it's not as scary because you kind of know that it works out. These people don't have a prior job. Selling yourself for sex isn't something you can put on your resume. A lot of them have convictions on the record because they were arrested for prostitution or for drugs because the traffickers get them addicted. So Switch's restoration program helps them eradicate their records. We go to judges and we appeal for them and say this was not their choice. They would have never done this if this person didn't force them into sex trafficking. And we take them to counseling, we take them to rehabilitation centers to help them get off of the drugs and to stop the addictions. And so our program is very, very in-depth, but we walk with these people side by side to help them overcome this. So how Switch comes in. So this little cycle you saw at the beginning, young people are at risk. So awareness training, which we're doing now, championing organizations who support at-risk people. So, and not just high schools and middle schools, I go to the Department of Juvenile Justice and I talk to youth in there. I go to foster homes and foster organizations and I present to them and I try to equip the foster parents as well as the children about the vulnerabilities that they have and the risks that are out there. Traffickers prey on vulnerabilities. We all have vulnerabilities. Having a child is a vulnerability. Like I said, I would do anything for my children. But I can know what the enemy is and I can protect myself and know how any fear I have, I create a solution. Like, okay, let's go down this rabbit hole of what's the worst possible thing that could happen. Now let me come up with a solution while I'm rational. So if this ever happened, I can more likely walk myself through it. Our prevention curriculum is a big way to help them. We don't take away their vulnerabilities, but we help them fill them up. And that's why we use a Jenga puzzle, and as we take a Jenga thing out, these are all holes in us. These are all of the vulnerabilities we have. But we can replace these vulnerabilities with counseling, with therapy, with words of affirmation, with good mental health, with having good support systems with our friends so that if we do choose to take risks, we know our friends are going to help protect us. And then step 3, or stage 3, victims are exploited and are trafficked. Our response is we're going out with our intervention to strip clubs, homeless shelters, foster care, and detention centers to help face this problem head on. Victims who survive may repeat what they know. And like I talked about, the recidivism rate where they go back into the life is really high. Switches, by the way, is really low. And I can't remember the numbers. I'm not a numbers person. I'm dyslexic, so they all get jumbled in my head. But like, I believe the national average was like ridiculously high, like 70. And like switches recidivism rate was like 40 or 50%. It was a lot lower because we walk with these people for 2 years, holding their hand and just empowering them to make choices. Like literally they go to the store to buy shampoo and they're like, what do I pick? You choose. You know, like I've never picked before, I don't know how. It's like, you just pick one. Like whatever one smells the best, take it. And so we walk with them, so that really helps with that recidivism rate, and then the next generation is at risk. So those at risk, the people that go back into the life, their children are more likely to go into this life as well because that's all the parents ever known. So the path to healing and restoration, I know this one's really hard to read up here, but stage 1, this is our first response. And so in here, in red, is what Switch's next goal is. We want to get a emergency stabilization home. So when people come to us right off the bat and want to get out of the life, we don't have an emergency shelter home to put them in. We don't know where to put them. And we can't put them in with domestic abuse victims because there is a weird thing that happens where domestic abuse victims will actually abuse these women. And so we don't have a home for them right now. We don't have an emergency shelter. So that's our goal, so that they can truly rest. When they come out of this life, they don't get rest. They literally will be put on uppers, which are drugs that make them stay awake for days on end. And then they'll give them alcohol so they can sleep for the weekend, or not the weekends, that's when they work. They can sleep for like Tuesday and Wednesday, and then they're back up Thursday, they give them more uppers. And so they have never truly rested. They have never truly slept a whole night through without pressure to do something or be something that they don't want to be. And so giving them that rest, stability, and security. Shelter, so what we do provide now is shelter. We can send them to rehabilitation homes. Usually they're out of the state because we don't have any here locally. And so we drive them to Georgia or Tennessee or North Carolina. Drug rehab, medical care if they need it, case management. We have therapists that will help them with their trauma, overcoming their trauma and healing. Stage 2, this is our intermediary restoration support, which is going to be more trauma-informed therapy. They take therapeutic classes, healing through art, healing through dance, and just really focusing on that rehabilitation. Life skill classes, how to cook, how to shop, how to pay your bills, how to, we always joke that adulting's hard. It really is hard, and so how they can do all of these things. Mentorship, part of our advocacy program, we have volunteers that are not like trained trauma-informed therapists, but we are just volunteers that basically befriend these people and say, if you need something, I'm here for you. If you have, a moment in the middle of the night where you're just crying and you need to talk to somebody, call me. If you need a ride to go get groceries, I'm going to be there for you. And so they get that partnership as well. Stage 3 is going to be the final restoration support. And so this may be going into a transition home that is going to help them start living more independently on their own, more therapy, pursuing education and certifications, job skills, case management support, and restoration-related transportation. Knowledge is power. So if you want to get your phones out, this is a great slide to take a picture of. Exodus Cried, Shared Hope, Fight the New Drug, and Polaris Project are all great resources. Our prevention curriculum is through love146.org. And I'll step out of the way here. And so Love 146, if you go to their website, that is an amazing organization. My business name is Dog Psychology and Training Center because I love psychology. I love how the human brain works. It's fascinating to me. And Love 146, we cater all of our prevention curriculum to cover like just the psychology behind it that was put into it. It just means so much to me. For example, at the end of every class, I have everybody write something down on an index card. So those people that are experiencing trauma at home and they want to reach out for help, they don't have to be the only ones isolated to write something down and bring it up to me. Everybody has to write something down. So I tell them, if you don't know what to say, just say it's nice outside. But everybody has to write something down so nobody feels isolated. Just little things like that. On their website though, there is a link, a portal for parents, and there is so many awesome resources on how to talk to your children at their level. So whatever their age is, they're all going through different developmental stages. It helps you reach them without scaring them too much, I think a little bit of fear is good and healthy. We talk about fearing the Lord. I have a solid fear of the Lord. He is more powerful than Satan. But it's a healthy fear. And I want you to have a healthy fear of trafficking. It is a real threat. It is a problem, but there are ways to protect and there are ways to prevent, and you will do that by getting education and resources. And then on the other side here are books. The White Umbrella, Rent and Lacey, Pursuit of Love, The Slave Next Door, and Scars and Stilettos. We need to add Rebecca Bender's book there. I can't remember the name, so I can email that to Jen, and you guys can look it up. It's a fantastic book. I loved it. Okay, potential red flags. So if you are concerned that somebody, maybe a child's friend or just somebody you see at the school, might be a trafficking victim, here are some of the red flags that you can start to look for. And I follow a body language expert known as Janine Driver. She's fantastic. But she talks about when you're reading somebody's body language. She was basically a human lie detector for the CIA, Homeland Security, basically any national organization that has like 3 letters she worked with. And she could tell if somebody was lying or not. And she said the way you do that is by seeing what's different from the norm. So when you look at these red flags, some of these might just be normal. And so if it's not all of a sudden, then it's probably, you need a lot of red flags, and you need it to be different from their normal. So like unexplained absences from school and truancy. I never went to school as a child because my mom worked first shift and she was a single parent, and so I had to walk myself to the bus stop. And if the Gargoyles cartoon was on, I wasn't going to go to school that day. I was just going to watch the show. And I missed a lot of school. Doesn't mean I was a trafficking victim. So signs of physical abuse. If they have another phone, a second phone, it's very strange that a child, a youth, or a young adult would need a second phone for their job. Withdrawn, depressed, or distracted. Maybe they used to get good grades, but now they don't. All of a sudden, they have a lot more money, or they're wearing really, really nice name brand clothes or fancy purses. Older boyfriends, or maybe they used to be really, really close to their family and friends, and now they're not. So if you see something, say something. So important. There is, the number I want you to add to your phone right now is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Switch does have an office phone, but that is for emergencies, for people that are actually in the life looking to get out. But the National Human Trafficking Hotline, why I want you to put that in your phone is if you see something suspicious, like you're at a gas station and you see a scantily clad young girl with an older looking dude that does not look like her father, you can call this hotline and say, hey, I just want to report something to you that I just saw. And you can describe what these people look like, you can give them their license plate number, and they put this in a national database that will actually redirect it to local law enforcement here in our human trafficking task force. And what this does is it helps us build a case. So when we finally get to move on a trafficker, we have to have so much evidence before we can move forward. It just helps us build that case. The other thing that it does is it prevents you from going up to them. A lot of people, myself included, I'm a very passionate person and I want to save everyone, so I just want to go up and basically kidnap them out of their life, which doesn't work, and it's not legal. But going up to somebody that you suspect is being trafficked is a big risk for them, because they usually are not allowed to make eye contact with other people, they're not allowed to talk to other people, and the trafficker will blame it on them if you notice that they are being trafficked and you're like, hey, how are you doing today? Can I help you? Is there anything you need? They're going to be punished for that later, because the trafficker will say that they were looking vulnerable. They wanted somebody to reach out to them. So the safest thing to do, the best thing to do for that person is to reach out to this hotline so that they can record it in their database, which will help law enforcement build a case to put these people away. You can scan our QR code to follow us on social media. Like I said, you help us out by just spreading the truth. So if you follow Switch on social media, if you don't, I encourage you to do so. We are all about spreading the truth of what human trafficking really looks like and how to combat it, and cases that do happen here in the upstate. So when you're in one of the mom groups like me, and you see this crazy post about this crazy guy at Target, and it has like 150 comments of like, me too, this happened to me too, that person was at my Target too. And I just had to take a deep sigh and not get too emotional, because I will spend 4 hours trying to combat all of these false propagandas, which I am actually coordinating with Switch to go live in some of these Facebook groups and tell them the truth of what sex trafficking looks like. That is a crazy person. It is a weirdo. I'm not saying that people don't kidnap children. I'm saying it's not trafficking. Because when we spread false truth about that, then the people that really are being trafficked were like, well, that's not me. I'm not in bondage. My trafficker didn't kidnap me, so I'm clearly not a trafficking victim. And so it just makes it harder for them to come out. If you want to get more involved with Switch, but maybe are not quite prepared to volunteer, we have a lot of events that come up that help us. The annual golf tournament is in May, just a couple months, and then the annual gala is in November. And this year's speaker is fantastic. He is the founder, president of Exodus Cry, which is another nonprofit that works nationally and worldwide to combat sex trafficking, and they are just chock full of awesome resources on how to combat this. But he's going to be our speaker for the gala, and I hope I get to go because it's close to Thanksgiving and we usually leave town. But ways to give. If you have the means to and you would like to donate, everything we do is on donation. So Switch is it's a nonprofit. So funding for our therapists, for the restoration homes for our victims, the supplies that they need to start their new life, that's all based on donations. But then it also helps us to do more outreach when we do our prevention program and we go to schools and DJJ and foster care so that we can better help more people. And so it says here, $30 a month can help break the connection between a trafficker and a survivor. And one thing that I didn't think about was when you try to get out of the life, like everything you have belongs to the trafficker, including their cell phone. And can you imagine living life without your cell phone right now? And so some of the things that we do when somebody reaches out to us, one of the first things we want to get them is a new phone. We want to give them a cell phone because they're not going to be able to use the trafficker's phone to contact us because the trafficker's monitoring their phone. And so we want them to have a new phone that's theirs, only theirs, so they can reach out to us and help begin that new path of their life. And then Switch was founded by Isaiah 42:16. I will lead the blind by the ways they have not known. Along unfamiliar paths I will guide them. I will turn the darkness into light before them and make the rough places smooth. These are the things I will do, and I will not forsake them. And that's why we're called Switch, because we are all about switching a light on the darkness of human trafficking. That's it. So I like to end with Q&A. I know this is really deep and it's heavy, heavy stuff, but if you had any questions